talk a little Aggie football, SEC football with our friend Jake Crain from Crain and Company, and you can find him at the Daily Wire as well. Mr. Crain, how you doing, buddy? How you been? It's been a minute.
David, what's up, buddy? It's good to be back.
Happy to have you on the show. Hey, a couple things I want to get into. Obviously, I saw your video yesterday that was awesome. Talk about the Aggies. But before that, I don't know when it was, maybe a month or two ago, you had a commentary on never trading. How did you phrase it? I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase it. But basically, you're not going to trade access for your opinions. And I thought that was such a cool thing to say, especially in this world, because I think you were being critical of Auburn at the time. And you're like, look, I'm going to tell you how it is. And that's what I owe my listeners and my viewers, and I really appreciated that.
Well, David, I appreciate it, man. Look, it's like I say on the show all the time. If I wanted to make everybody happy, I'd sell ice cream for a living. I think one of the reasons that our show does as well as it does, it's because, regardless of who you're a fan of, I mean, I was in it. I coached for 10 years, almost 7 years at Division I level. I know how the sausage is made, and nobody sends me money to carry water for any school, and I wouldn't do it anyway, even the school that I root for. I just think it's a breath of fresh air sometimes when, we always say facts don't care about your feelings, and I think we kind of echo that.
Talking to Jake Crain here on TexAgs Radio, presented by David Gardner's Jewelers. Jake, let's get into A&M and the Elko era, and basically I'll summarize part of what you said yesterday. Elko brings that swagger back and a little bit of an old school swagger, if you will.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, every program that's worth its salt has an identity, in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean schematically that if you're the coach at Georgia Southern, you're always going to have to run the triple option. But there's a toughness mindset. I think lately A&M's been they need to be more Yellowstone than they are Suits. Like, this doesn't need to be a beauty contest. It needs to be a bar fight. When I think about A&M, I don't think about a bunch of pretty boys walking the red carpet. I don't think about, NIL and just all this money. I think about the 12th man. I think about the Junction Boys. I think about a group of guys that may not put everything they're wearing on Instagram, but they're trying to knock the teeth through the back of your throat. And I think of a culture that you get every inch out of everyone. It's people playing better than who they really are. That doesn't mean you don't want to recruit the best players. I just think A&M, and I think this is Jimbo's fault, sacrifice talent for culture all across the board. And when you do that, it's not sustainable, even in the era of the transfer portal. And I think Mike Elko is going to bring that grittiness back. I think he's going to bring that, excuse my language, that tough ass back a little bit, that's what A&M should be. That doesn't mean you're always going to win every game. That doesn't mean you're going to go on a dynastical run. But to operate at its highest level of efficiency, I think Texas A&M's got to get back to who they are. And that's more Yellowstone than it is Suits.
And what about Elko makes you feel that he brings that to this program?
It's the vibe. I can tell, man. I can tell by the way the man handles himself. I think, he's no nonsense, but I think he's no nonsense in a way that as a player, you realize he cares about you enough to hold you accountable regardless of how good you are. I think Mike Elko is going to treat every single player the same, whether they're the starting quarterback or they're a walk-on snapper. I think that's what he brings. I think he brings back the element of understanding the physicality level across the board has to reach the potential of the player, and you do that through the mindset of the program. Now, that doesn't mean that nobody was tough under Jimbo Fisher when he was there. I mean, A&M's had some really good defenses and some really talented players, but you don't win wars with one soldier. Even when Johnny Manziel was at A&M, it was great. They were scoring a bunch of points, but what did they really win outside of an individual Heisman Trophy and some individual accolades? It's about winning rings. It's about winning championships. And for A&M to have a chance to do that, they've got to get back to that old, tough cowboy mindset. And I think Mike Elko's got that dog in him like that.
How hard is that in today's world of college sports, NIL, transfer, kind of a diva-ish personalities that are out there because of this generation is a little bit different?
Yeah, it is, and every player's different, right? Every circumstance is different. Every recruitment's different. You have to know the person that you're dealing with. But there's an old saying, when I recruit you, I take on a little bit of your personality. When you come join the team, you take on all of our personality. And I think Mike Elko understands that. Now, is it harder today than it was back in the day, heck yes. To get anybody to do anything is harder today, especially a young person, than it was back then. But there's a balance. And at the end of the day, NFL still translates to more money than NIL. And I still think deep down, when you're dealing with families' most prized possession, which is their child, they have to know that you genuinely care about them when it's going good and when it's going bad. And I think Mike Elko understands that. It's not easy, and very few guys can do it. But if you can do it today in today's world, you're worth your weight in gold. And I think that's the difference.
Jake, I noticed you did talk a little bit about Jimbo going after Saban. Do you think people would look at that whole rant differently if they were successful, or is it because they weren't successful? Because I feel like in the aftermath, more people were on Jimbo's side than Saban's, but with history and a little time, I feel like public opinion has changed.
Well, look, I think when you win, it hides a lot of stuff, right? I mean, sunlight's the best disinfectant, and you get the most sunlight when it's not going good. So to answer your first question, yes, it would be viewed through a different prism, but that's not what happened. And one of the reasons I think it happened is because you're, again, adding an outside element or giving people bulletin board material, even if it's a reaction to what somebody said, and you're not focused on the next lift. You're not focused on going to the next class. You're not focused on making the next read. It's about eliminating distractions on the outside to be able to narrow your focus, regardless of how big your ego is. Mike Elko's not going to throw a pass. He's not going to make a tackle. The players are. And when it comes down to preparation, I don't care if Nick Saban says something. I don't care if Ryan Day says something. I don't care if Joe Biden says something. I don't think Mike Elko is going to respond because he's too busy trying to figure out a way to beat your brains in. And that's what I like.
Talking to Jake Crain here on TexAgs Radio, presented by David Gardner's Jewelers. I don't think we've spoken since the Colin Klein hire. I know we talked after Elko, but just your thoughts on that addition to the offense and what he might be able to do with Connor Wigman.
Well, to me, it's one of the best hires you could have made. I thought it was one of the best coordinator hires, I know the offseason's continuing, the quote-unquote offseason. But here's what I like about Colin. Colin does have a system in his head. He knows the way he wants to operate. And how is that? Balance, right? You have some guys that are, hey, I want to throw it around a ton, or I'm just going to run into a brick wall and run some play action. Colin understands, one, you call plays to set up other plays. That's what the best play callers in the world do. Bobby Petrino, Lane Kiffin, and as a young guy, he understands that. Number two is he understands that he has to mold what he does to his personnel. And that's a lost art in today's game. A lot of coaches go into new places, especially young coordinators, and they're like, we're going to do everything exactly the same way as I did it at the place before because that's what works. Well, when you go to a new place, you don't have all your personnel in there. Now, he's lucky he has Connor Wegman, who I've been high on since last year, and I really think it kind of came to fruition. I know he got hurt, but I'm excited about him this year. He understands that he has to adapt to what he does to the player on the field. So I think he's way mature beyond his years. That's the reason I like to hire the most.
Let me ask you about Connor. Where is Connor, a healthy Connor, what you've seen from a healthy Connor in the landscape of SEC quarterbacks?
Well, I mean, I think he's an NFL player. If we're going to talk about, the most complete quarterbacks, I think Connor was on his way to being a guy that we know he's not going to be Lamar Jackson, but he doesn't have to. He needs to be good at running when he has to run. He has to know when to say when. But what I like about Connor is he views the whole field. He's not afraid to get to his third read. A lot of guys, and the RPO has done this to a lot of guys, they're used to having two options and then you got to make a decision or make a decision quickly. Connor is willing to give what the defense takes him. And one of the best things that I saw Connor Wegman do, and it's very hard, especially with young quarterbacks, is he will throw the check down all the way down the field if you give it to him. That is an art form in itself. It may not be sexy, it may not be flashy, it may not make the highlight reel, but it does get you in 2nd and 6 and keep you at a 2nd and 10 or a turnover. So, you add the maturity level of Connor Wegman, you add the ability and the capability level of Connor Wegman with the maturity and capability level of Colin Klein, and if he can stay healthy, I think they can make really good music together with what A&M has around them.
Well, Jake, I dumb it down for everybody. To me, it all comes back to the offensive line. If you could protect this quarterback and this backfield, good things are going to happen. Unfortunately, they have not protected their quarterbacks the last 3 years.
Yeah, and that goes back to kind of the mindset of what I brought up. I mean, A&M needs to be a in-your-face, physical, snatching guys, maybe a little bit dirty. That's okay at that position up front on the offensive line. And I don't care if you're a dual-threat quarterback, if you're a pro-style quarterback, if you're just an athlete that throws it every once in a while. The offensive line is the engine of the offense, just like the defensive line is the engine of the defense. It's a lot easier to hide average skill players behind an offensive line, just like it's a lot easier to hide an average secondary behind an elite defensive line. It doesn't work the other way. It's like that in the NFL all the way through Friday Night Tykes. If you're bad up front, you're a bad football team.
Talking to Jake Crain here on TexAgs Radio, presented by David Gardner's Jewelers. So, look, I understand their history. I understand that they're a program that gets things done at LSU, but I'm having a hard time seeing why so many people are picking them as a playoff team, other than we know that they're usually really, really good. They've lost all of their offense. Their defense has been a train wreck, at least last season. Are they as good as a lot of people think, or do you have questions like I do?
Well, I mean, look, you can only learn so much from the spring game, but what I saw defensively didn't exactly fill me with blossoming joy if I'm an LSU fan, because that's the biggest question, right? We know offensively what they did last year, and it's really kind of sad the defense was that bad, because that was a generational type offense that we saw from LSU last year. And listen, I think they're going to be good offensively under Garrett Nussmeier this year at quarterback, but there's no way they're going to be able to replicate what they did offensively last year. So the answer for LSU to take that next step is they've got to be a more complete team. And it's weird to watch the level of athlete that LSU has running around on defense not be able to make plays. But until they show me that they can be a well-rounded football team, I am not buying into the hype of LSU being able to win a ring of any kind. Not saying that they won't win 8 games, not saying they won't beat somebody they're not supposed to. But at some point, whether it's basketball, whether it's football, whether it's baseball, volleyball, Quidditch, whatever, at some point through the year, the offense is not going to be operating at an extremely high level, and you've got to win games on defense and special teams. We see this in the NCAA tournament in basketball all the time. Sometimes the shots aren't falling. You better be able to rebound and play defense, or you can get put out. And so until LSU shows me that, I am not buying into, LSU's a complete team now. I got to see y'all tackle somebody first.
Talking to Jake Crain here on TexAgs Radio. I don't want to say the same thing about Texas, because it's different. They're coming in with a top 5 name probably by them. But what do you think about Texas this year based on how close those games were last year in the Big 12, yet they still made the playoffs with an SEC schedule? That being said, not the toughest of SEC schedules to start off.
Well, look, I mean, Texas from a roster standpoint is really good, right? I think, regardless of who you root for, you look at who they have and who they return, especially up front. And I know they lost some guys in that front 7, but they returned some talented players too, and they've recruited and kind of stockpiled on that defensive line. The question becomes, can Quinn Ewers stay healthy? He hasn't been able to stay healthy through a whole season, and going to the SEC doesn't exactly fill me with hope that he's going to be able to stay healthy. But if he does, I think what Texas is going to find out, and Sark knows this, one of the best elements and the biggest advantages Texas has is that Sarkisian has coached in the SEC. See, the common misconception is that, you just got to beat Alabama or you just got to beat Georgia. That's not what makes the SEC tough. What makes the SEC tough is pretty much every single weekend in conference play, you are playing a team with NFL players on their roster. You are playing a team with a rabid fan base, whether you're at home or away, but especially away, and that it is an absolute fist fight every single week. And if you don't play well, you will lose games in this league, multiple games. So is the Texas team prepared to go through that gauntlet of a fight for that long and to be able to sustain? Because that's what makes the SEC tough. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I don't think Texas is going to be able to go through this thing unscathed. The question is, will they be able to go through it unscathed enough to be able to get into the 12-team playoff?
Based on the unknowns of what Kalen DeBoer is going to look like at Alabama, are they still Alabama? Are they still one of the top teams in the country, considering some of the change in roster and a new philosophy up top?
First off, hats off to Kalen DeBoer for taking that job. I mean, that takes some pelotas to decide to follow the GOAT. So I give him credit there. Look, where I'm at with Alabama, they still have elite talent, right? Alabama's still very talented. I know some guys have hit the portal, but it's still a top 5 to top 10 roster in college football. But I think what you're going to see is the Kalen DeBoer era and tenure will be defined on the level of freak out that happens once it inevitably goes wrong at some point for Alabama this season. Whether that's going up to Camp Randall and playing Wisconsin and then having to play Georgia, or maybe losing to somebody who they don't typically lose to. The way the team reacts and the way the fan base reacts, I think is going to dictate how comfortable Kalen DeBoer is moving forward. But he has won a lot of games. We talked to him at the Senior Bowl. I talked about this with Colin Klein earlier. He is going to mold what he does to what Alabama has, which is a lot easier to do at Alabama than other places. But losing Ryan Grubb, I think, is a lot bigger deal than what other people are saying. Yes, Kalen DeBoer is an offensive mind, but it's one thing to be the guy that owns the Hardys. It's another thing to be the guy that makes the chicken. And Ryan Grubb was the guy that made the chicken, so we'll see without him because they've been together for a long time.
What do you think about Deion in Colorado this year? He still complains quite a bit. He still makes himself the show. Obviously, brings in players. But what do you think about the Buffs this year?
That up front, like what's going to change with Colorado up front? I mean, they just lost their only experienced offensive lineman to the transfer portal. I know they brought in some guys, but they have no depth. And I don't care what system you run. Like I said, I don't care if it's Shadur Sanders at quarterback or that big tree statue that Iowa's had the past couple of years. Like, it doesn't matter. If you're not good up front, it's not going to work. But where Colorado, and look, we can make fun of Deion Sanders saying, I'm going to bring my Louis with me, and then all of a sudden all his luggage is disappearing now. But I think the biggest problem that Colorado is going to have is they're not going to sneak up on anybody anymore. Like, there's no new car smell. Like, the excitement and the anticipation is kind of gone. Now the expectation has been raised. And all those games last year that Colorado went into as the underdog, and Deion Sanders said, oh, it's personal, Nebraska, I can go through the list, all these teams. Well, now those teams are hunting Colorado, and that's a lot different banner to carry. That's a lot different chip on your shoulder to have going into this year. And I tell you this much, Dave, they got North Dakota State week 1. And if you're not good up front, North Dakota State will find a way to win that game. Then you go to Nebraska, you go to Colorado State. You look at the rest of that schedule. I like the under in 5.5 wins this year, and it could get ugly.
Hey, so I don't know if they've ruled on it yet, but the NCAA is about to allow the multiple transfers, which they've been allowing anyway, but make it more official. It looks like that's not going to get fixed. How do they fix that in the future, Jake?
Well, man, like, I don't know now that you let it out of the box. Like, you let the monster out into the village, and he started ripping villagers apart because you didn't teach him anything. They did the same thing with NIL. You're not going to win any court case against the players right now. You're not. You're looked at like the bad side of Germany after we split it up in World War II. That's what anybody who wants rules looks like. So what is the answer now? Take away the very few rules that are left? I don't think there's any putting this back in the box. At this point, I think they've totally screwed it up. I laid out what they should have done with the transfer portal. Very black and white, very easy. We could have avoided all of this and still found a way to make it advantageous and even for the players when it comes to the coaches. But that's not what they did. They panicked. They let the monster out in the village, and now they're wondering why all the villagers are headed up to the mayor's house with pitchforks and torches because a monster's running around college athletics.
Jake, last thing for you. How is it working at the Daily Wire? Do you see Ben in the hallways? What's the vibe like? Are your studios in that area? Like, just kind of explain the work there.
Oh, well, I mean, look, it's great. The people, we're kind of in our own world because we do the sports show. Like everybody else is talking about like immigration and like inflation and all that stuff. I'm not saying it's not important, but like, it's kind of weird when they're like, oh, we need to fix immigration. And I'm like, and we need to figure out what a catch truly is. Like, it's just, we're kind of different than anybody that works here. So yeah, like the other hosts, we chop it up with them all the time. Shapiro's somewhere else. He's not where we're at up here in Nashville, but we just went down and saw him the other day. But yeah, man, we're kind of we're kind of like the jocks at the high school, I guess, in a good way, though.
Well, you're doing great work, man. Thanks so much for joining us here on the show. We'll do it again, all right?
Hey, y'all guys let me know. Y'all do incredible stuff. I hope every A&M realizes how lucky they are to have something like TexAgs and what you and Billy do. It's always fun, man, and always like chopping it up with you.
Appreciate you, sir. We'll talk to you very soon, all right?
All right, buddy. No beauty contest, just bar fights. Figure it out, A&M.